Every single second of your life, your body is solving this absolutely incredible logistics problem. How do you get oxygen from the air you just breathed in to every single one of your trillions of cells? It's a journey that's way more complex and, frankly, way more brilliant than you might think. So let's dive in. So let's just start with that basic question. You take a big breath, right? Oxygen floods your lungs. But then what? How does it actually make that long trip all the way down to, say, your big toe, which is screaming for it to function? It's happening inside of you this very second. Well, you might think, oh, it probably just dissolves in your blood, kind of like sugar and water. But it turns out that would be a terrible strategy. Our blood is mostly water, and it's shockingly bad at carrying dissolved oxygen. I mean, if we had to rely on that method alone, we'd be in serious, serious trouble. The body needed a much better way, like a dedicated delivery service. And here it is. Meet the hero of our story, hemoglobin. This incredible protein is packed into our red blood cells by the hundreds of millions. It is literally our body's purpose-built oxygen delivery truck. You can see it's made of 4 parts or subunits, and at the heart of each one is an iron atom. And that's the magic bit. That's the part that's ready to grab onto an oxygen molecule. So, to put it simply, hemoglobin is the protein that makes our blood red and, more importantly, allows it to shuttle oxygen from our lungs, where we have a ton of it, to the rest of the body where it's desperately needed. Without this molecule, our lives would be completely impossible. Okay, so hemoglobin doesn't just grab and release oxygen whenever it feels like it. It actually follows this incredibly precise and brilliant set of rules. You can think of it like an operating manual. And that manual is visualized in one of the most famous graphs in all of biology. This right here is the oxygen-hemoglobin dissociation curve. Now, I know it might look a little technical, but it's actually a beautiful story told in the form of a graph. All it's really showing us is how willing hemoglobin is to hold on to oxygen at different oxygen levels. It's basically a map of hemoglobin's behavior. So the first thing you probably notice is that weird S shape. It's not a straight line, and that's exactly where the genius is. Up here on the flat part, the plateau, that's what's happening in your lungs. There's tons of oxygen, so hemoglobin loads up to nearly 100% full, and it holds on tight. But then look down here, on this really steep part. This is what happens in your tissues. As the oxygen levels drop just a little bit, hemoglobin suddenly lets go of a huge amount of its cargo. It's just perfectly designed for both loading up and dropping off. So how does it pull off this perfect curve? Well, the secret is something called cooperative binding. See, hemoglobin can exist in 2 different states. When it's empty, it's in what's called a tense or T state. It's kind of reluctant to bind oxygen. But as soon as that first oxygen molecule manages to hop on, it triggers a big change. The whole protein shifts into a relaxed, or R state, and that makes it way, way easier for the second, third, and fourth oxygen molecules to jump on board. It's like teamwork, and it's what creates that super important steep slope on the curve. But wait, the story gets even better. That curve isn't just fixed in stone. Hemoglobin is this dynamic little machine that is actively responding to what your body is doing, making sure oxygen gets delivered exactly where it's needed the most. I mean, just think about what happens when you exercise, right? Your muscles are working hard, they get hot, they produce acid, and they're pumping out carbon dioxide. Well, hemoglobin senses all of this. Now look at the graph. The solid line is our normal curve. But see that dotted line shifting over to the right? That right shift is caused by those exact conditions in your muscles. And what does it mean? It means that hemoglobin is being forced to release more of its oxygen. It's a brilliant feedback system that's basically yelling, hey, drop off more oxygen right here, right now. This whole phenomenon actually has a name. It's called the Bohr effect. It's just the principle that hemoglobin's grip on oxygen gets weaker in places that are acidic and have a lot of CO2. So the big takeaway here is that your hardest working tissues automatically get first dibs on oxygen, all thanks to this elegant chemical loop. And the system is even more clever than that. Now, this diagram looks a little busy, but the main idea is really simple. As hemoglobin unloads its oxygen in the tissues, its shape changes again. And that new shape makes it much, much better at picking up waste products like carbon dioxide. So not only is it the oxygen delivery truck, it's also the garbage truck on the way back. So look at how this all fits together in this perfect little dance. In your tissues, all that CO2 and acid forces oxygen off hemoglobin. And as that oxygen leaves, it makes it easier for the CO2 to get picked up. Then, when the blood gets back to your lungs, the whole thing happens in reverse. All the oxygen there forces the CO2 off, and as the CO2 leaves, it makes it easier to pick up more oxygen. It is a perfect two-way reciprocal system. This system is just beautiful under normal conditions. But what happens when we really push our bodies to the absolute limit? Let's take a look at how this whole system adapts when it's under pressure in some pretty extreme environments. So let's say you're at high altitude, there's just less oxygen in the air. This presents your body with a really tough choice, a fundamental trade-off. Should your hemoglobin become stickier, that's a left shift on the curve, so it can grab every last oxygen molecule it can from the thin air? Or should it become less sticky, a right shift, to make sure it can release that precious oxygen to your tissues? You can't have it both ways. So which one is more important? Well, to find the answer, we can actually look at a natural experiment that happens every single day. The placenta, which is where a fetus gets all of its oxygen, is a naturally low oxygen environment. For that fetus, the single biggest, most important challenge is just loading up enough oxygen from its mother's blood in the first place. And here is nature's brilliant solution. Look at these two curves on the graph. The line for the fetus's blood is clearly shifted to the left of the mother's. That's because fetal hemoglobin is a different model. Its left-shifted curve means it has a much higher attraction for oxygen, which allows it to literally pull oxygen away from the mother's hemoglobin. This tells us something really profound. When loading oxygen is the biggest problem, biology always prioritizes a left shift. This system is incredibly robust, but it can be hijacked. There is one molecule that is an absolute master imposter, and it can bring this entire beautiful system to a catastrophic halt. I'm talking about carbon monoxide. The insane danger of carbon monoxide really comes down to this one single terrifying number. It binds to the exact same spot on hemoglobin as oxygen does, but its grip is about 250 times stronger. It gets on and it absolutely refuses to let go. And this creates a devastating triple threat. First, obviously, it reduces your blood's capacity to carry oxygen by just taking up all the seats. But the second effect is what makes it so unbelievably deadly. The carbon monoxide that does bind locks the hemoglobin in that super high-affinity relaxed state. This creates a massive shift to the left. So now any oxygen that is still on board is held so tightly that it can't be released to the tissues that are starving for it. It's a brutal one-two punch that leads to suffocation at the cellular level. So when we step back and we just look at this simple S-shaped curve, what is it really telling us? Because it's so much more than just a graph of oxygen levels. I think this quote just sums it up perfectly. The curve, it maps out the fundamental trade-offs of life itself. It shows that tension between picking a resource up and then having to drop it off later. It outlines all the possible strategies, the possible solutions, but it doesn't tell us which one is best. For that, we have to look at how life itself has solved the problem, whether it's a fetus in the womb or an animal on a mountaintop. And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. This one curve reveals this entire hidden world of compromise and optimization just for oxygen. So it really begs the question, what other invisible trade-offs, what other elegant balancing acts are happening inside you right this very second just to keep you alive?